I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies.
The Boondocks is an American sitcom made by Aaron McGurder that aired from 2005 to 2014. The show's main premise follows the Freeman family, which consists of Riley, Huey, and Robert Jebediah Freeman, aka Granddad, as they live their day-to-day lives in the upper-class, predominantly white neighborhood known as Woodcrest. Throughout the show's 4 seasons, the episodes take a humorous approach to look at and address several issues and gives different perspectives on these issues based on various lenses, including race, gender, and class. For the purposes of this video, we'll be focusing on the class lens, and our main thesis is how people act and treat others differently based on their class and the people they're interacting with, their class. The first example is found in Season 1, Episode 1, entitled Garden Party. The main plot of this episode is that the Freemans are new to the neighborhood and they get invited to a garden party by the person who owns the neighborhood, Ed Wunsler. And in this scene, there's a nice example of the class difference, the class lens. In this scene, when Ed Wunsler is introduced, Riley, Huey, and Granddad are talking in the living room, and the doorbell gets rung. Rang? I don't know. And Granddad goes to open it, and at first Granddad is very rude and dismissive of the person at the door because he doesn't know who it is. But once he finds out it's Ed Wunsler, the person who owns his house, he acts much more polite and welcoming and friendly to him. This is showing that he literally changes the way he acted and talked to try and to get into Ed Wunsler's good graces. This is a recurring theme throughout the show. For example, Season 3, Episode 3, entitled Red Ball. The premise of this episode is that Wunsler lost a bet with a Chinese investor, and the entire neighborhood of Woodcrest was under threat of repossession by the Chinese unless they played a game of kickball. And Mr. Wunsler wants to recruit Huey onto the team. However, Huey had retired from the game of kickball because in a prior game he believed he had seriously injured somebody, and that made him want to quit. However, Granddad forced Huey to play because he wanted to end up in Ed Wunsler's good graces. When he drags Huey to the kickball court and forced him to play, Ed Wunsler congratulates him, saying, "I'll remember this when I go for my yearly Christmas yacht shopping." This is showing that Granddad is willing to disregard how his own family feels in pursuit of trying to please someone in a higher class than him to hopefully reap some of the rewards or benefits of the person in said class. Another example of this comes again from the first episode of the first season, when Granddad goes to get a glass of orange juice from the refrigerator. At first, everything seems normal as he walks to the refrigerator, but when he gets to the refrigerator and opens it, you see that there's nothing in the refrigerator but the orange juice, which is empty. After he figures out that the orange juice is empty, he calls down the boys and asks them about why the juice is empty. He says something along the lines of that he spent Huey and Riley's inheritance on the house. Like, he spent their money, the money that they would have gotten when he died, to pay for the house. And this is treated as a throwaway line, but it actually highlights something that shows a major class difference between the Freemans and the people of Woodcrest. See, Woodcrest is, as I said earlier, an upper class neighborhood, and if and Granddad had to spend his entire inheritance to get to the house, which was years and years of work. And and his the people, the residents, like his neighbors, they probably didn't have to do that at all. They probably didn't even think about the money they spent to get there, which just shows the difference in class and how drastic of a difference there is. Along this line of moving to the upper class neighborhood, I'll give some context. Before the Freemans lived in Woodcrest, they lived in a rough part of Chicago, and there Huey had a friend. His name was Kiro. Huey and Kiro became friends under this idea that they were both in the struggle, like in the trenches, and that was something that really united the two. So when Huey moved away to an upper class, predominantly white neighborhood, Kiro saw this as like turning his back on the movement and like the struggle, and this caused him to dislike Huey. And we can see this in episode 13 of season 1, titled Wingman. In this episode, the plot is Robert Freeman goes back there. The Freemans go back to Chicago because Robert, Granddad's friend, died. Like his old World War II buddy died, so they went to attend his funeral. When they're at the funeral and in Chicago in general, Huey tries to reconnect with Kiro and catch up with him, but Kiro turns him away, saying that he believes he's a fake and he's like a sellout because he escaped the poor living situations that he had to go live in the upper class neighborhood. And this is indicative of a sort of a view that some people have. Some people in lower income areas have this idea that they're in the struggle and the hard life, which they are, but they don't necessarily like it when people are get out of that to move on to something better. They feel like they sell out, so to speak. And that theme is really explored in season 1, episode 13. Back to the season 1, episode 1. While Granddad is yelling at Huey and Riley about drinking all the orange juice, Riley uses the N-word, and Granddad tells him to not say the N-word because they live around the white people now. And this on its own isn't necessarily indicative on the surface, but if we dive a little bit deeper, we can come to the conclusion. People historically that use the N-word were usually from lower income neighborhoods, and it conveyed a sense of they were seen as less educated or more prone to violence and things like that. And so Granddad doesn't want them to be associated with that because he doesn't want his family to be associated with, quote, lower class people in the new neighborhood. Another thing that comes up another thing that adds to my argument is how the media portrays different classes in like movies. There's a article entitled "Media Representations of the Social Class" by Revised Sociology that gives us a brief overview about how different classes are represented in the media. And when they get to the working class, they talk about how they're represented as feckless people who are prone to violence and aggression and generally uneducated and things of the sort. And the Boondocks sort of plays into this stereotype with season 1, episode 2. And the plot of that is that R. Kelly is put on trial for urinating on a minor, and people from both sides of the argument gather outside the courthouse to protest. And the people that are for Robert Kelly are portrayed to be unkept and dirty, and they use the N-word a lot, and they're very loud, aggressive. Whereas the people who are portrayed to be in favor of R. Kelly being imprisoned. They're shown to be a quiet, well-mannered, unkept, that sort of thing. And to add to this, later in this scene, after they argue, the two sides end up fighting, like going fisticuffs, and it is the people who are for R. Kelly's freedom, the ones who want him to not be charged, they're the ones who end up throwing the first punch, which kind of plays into the idea that people who are of a lower class, so to speak, are more prone to violence. Another source that talks about a little bit about the representation about race and class and things of the sort is Media Diversity Institute, and they have an article titled "As the Media Has a Reckoning on Race and Gender, It's Time to Talk About Class." And the article talks about how the lower class / the working class has been portrayed in movies and just entertainment in general as people who are, they're kind of tools for mockery almost. And the Boondocks again kind of plays into this actually, because it says it uses people who are it for some situations they have people who are not, they have people say things that most would consider to be ignorant, but they say it in a way that's very aggressive and abrasive and not very eloquent. And this is kind of, and these people are kind of shown by their art styles, even, that they are perceived to be lower class. And I'd like to talk about the art styles for just a second. So for the main characters, Huey, Riley, and Granddad, the art style is fairly consistent. They're drawn with straight lines, and the proportions are well, and everything is drawn with respect to the characters. But when characters come onto the screen who are maybe background characters, especially those who are supposed to represent the group of people that are we can assume to be a lower income, their art style is a lot more jagged. The lines, the facial expressions are a lot more sharp and generally more unappealing than the regular characters, or even say like a person like Mr. Onceler. He's shown to be very wealthy, and his art style is very smooth. He has very defined features. He's not necessarily ugly by conventional standards. Now, don't get me wrong, he certainly isn't pretty. He's a very old man, but the art style is drawn with respect to the character. And another thing about it would be in season 3, episode 12, where the premise of the show is that there's a fried chicken virus going around, and people are upset because they can't buy fried chicken. And the people that there's a part of the episode where it's like a news segment, and they interview people on the street, and the people in the street they're shown through their actions and their language and things that they say to be portraying a lower class. And one lady says, "How am I supposed to feed my kids without the fried chicken?" implying she doesn't have the money to buy groceries, like healthy groceries, so she has to resort to fast food to feed her kids. These are some of the examples of the Boondocks viewed through a lens of class. In conclusion, the class lens, at least in the Boondocks, and even in real life, it can be applicable to real life, but through the class lens, we can see that people act differently they treat others differently, and they're even portrayed differently. People of a higher class generally are cared to with more respect and more precision, whereas people who are portrayed as a lower class are generally the brunt of many jokes and mockery of the sort. And yeah, that's my thesis. Thank you for watching.